Yay. Hello, Valerie. We will get started shortly. Just waiting for people to get in the room. Let's see. Go ahead and grab your water and your tea. I will in a moment while I find this track for you. Let's see. You know, it'd probably be easiest. What I will do here is I'm going to put it up here. All right. All right, hold on. All right. Hello everyone coming in. Hello, grits and 40s. We're going to be talking about discipline today. We're going to be talking about redefining discipline, what discipline actually means. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Dr. Erica Steele. I'm a board certified naturopathic doctor. I have 7 degrees in my field. And we're just doing some public health education today on redefining what discipline actually means, because so often we have framed discipline out to be something that it's not, and primarily associated with punishment and associated with fear. And so what we're going to teach today is really how to transform that consciousness. So hopefully you can hear me. I'm also streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and IG. Let me go ahead and get the live going, making sure IG is taken care of. Perfect. All right, we're good. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to discuss really is what we've been taught about discipline, because quite frankly, it's not actually the way that things are. Imagine that what we've been taught is actually not what is the real. Let me see. Let me make sure that I have the right slide. My slides kind of got all out of alignment. Hold on. Let me see. We have that one. And then what we've been taught about discipline. No. Bear with me as I figure this out. Let me see. Don't even see the actual. There we go. All right, cool. So here is the deal. What have we been taught specifically about discipline? We've been taught that discipline is a punishment, right? So we dread discipline, we fight discipline, we avoid discipline. Discipline we almost look at as like a really bad thing. And discipline in and of itself has been culturally rooted, hello, Vario, in shame, in control, and really subjugation, oppression, and fundamentally obedience. Hey, Anna, you've got to teach me how to put the little things in there. I thought I did it, and it didn't stick. So I need to figure that out. All right. So again, societal and familiar conditioning And so, culturally, we've been taught and conditioned to for us to determine what shame actually is. And so we can redefine that, because shame has an impact on our nervous system and ultimately our self-worth. So our self-worth typically is going to then generate, hey, Waverly, is going to generate nervous system and nervous system reactions. And so we want to redefine these, because we want to have a greater relationship with discipline, because that's where the rubber meets the road with most of our actions that we want to accomplish. So we have an intention, right? We bring that intention down into our mind, into a thought and a thought pattern. And then through that thought pattern, we have an emotional response based off of it. And that emotional response is either going to be motivating or demotivating, whatever we choose for that to be. And then from there, hey, Crown, from there, we're going to either have action or inaction. And so we get to decide how that action is and how that inaction is. And so as a result of that, right, it's again rooted in how we feel about ourselves, our self-identity, our self-worth, our self-concept, and ultimately our self-esteem. And that comes from our subconscious mind, our primitive mind. What we're telling ourselves on a consistent basis is actually driving our actions, driving our behavior, driving our habits, and ultimately driving our lifestyles. So if we want to shift our, lifestyles, we want to shift our relationship with discipline. Discipline in and of itself is not a negative thing. However, many of us have associated discipline with many negative things because discipline was taught to us in that way. So here's the problem. Thank you so much for the roses. Here's the problem with traditional discipline that we have, right? So a lot of times our traditional discipline is rooted in fear. It's rooted in avoidance. It's rooted in a rebellion and compliance. And so it's rooted in it's our original connection to discipline. So in many cases, discipline was done through some sort of external motivation, whether that was violent or not. There was or manipulation, or even psychological, mental, even just with certain things like abandonment or withdrawal. So if people withdraw their affection or withdraw their love, that's actually a sense of control. And so it disconnects us from ultimately our intuition. Thank you for the follow. And our trusting of self. And it reinforces perfectionism and burnout, because now our relationship with discipline is that I have to keep going. I have to keep surviving. I have to keep making this person, that person, this person, that person happy. So that's an external motivator, and external motivators never work. Or they only work for a short period of time. We need intrinsic motivators. These are motivators. Thank you for the roses. These are motivators that come from within, right? Because it really has to be because we love ourselves, accept ourselves, encourage ourselves, and want the very best for ourselves. So again, if that negative conversation or that negative influencing in the subconscious mind, remember, subconscious mind develops between 0 and 8 years old. And so whatever that voice is, right, whoever's voice that is, most of the time it's not your voice. And what happens is we can use that tool kind of repeatedly to perpetuate these unhealthy traditional cycles with discipline. Instead, we're going to shift that consciousness from a tool of domination and subjugation and oppression, and more so move it from a place of growth. But that requires us to take back our own power in this situation. So when we redefine actually what discipline is, we recognize that it is one of devotion, not deprivation. So we're going to shift our conscious awareness from this punishing, I have this association with discipline as being something that is painful or something that can harm me, to now this is something that is fulfilling me, that is driving me, that is actually filling my cup. And so we really have to look at our core values and what our values are that drive our relationships, that drive our behaviors, really that drive our intrinsic motivation. And so we want to make sure that our actions are now aligned with our willpower, that's where kind of in this concept of inspired action comes in, because it really should be effortless. And so when you're trying too hard for anything, that means that you're trying to use your force and not your power. So if you're using your force, you're using your perfectionism, you're using, those old external motivators that used to drive you. When you're living in flow, you're not in a struggle. There is no resistance happening, other than if you're growing. And it's about having consistency with self, and it's more of a self-healing journey and self-awareness rather than this demanding, flawless execution. So we get out of this mindset that it has to be perfect, or we have to show up a certain way, or it has to look a certain way. Oh, thank you guys for the roses so much. Instead, thank you for the heart me. Instead, what we're doing is we're building this as really this sacred devotion. Now, when I say that, right, all kinds of things go up, but also recognize that that does not necessarily mean that others will understand your journey. And that is absolutely conflicting how we've been conditioned. Instead, we've been conditioned to self-abandon, to make sure that our needs don't matter, shrink ourselves, self-abandon, and make everyone else comfortable. So it's a two-step process, not just the self-abandonment, but then also everyone else's needs matter more. Everyone else's things that they need done need more reverence than ourselves. And when we begin to pull that back with ourselves, and we begin to really be more disciplined within our own definition of it, now all of a sudden we really get to see all the masks come off for people, and we get to see really who is there for us and who is not. So as we're doing that, there's pillars of holistic discipline as we look at it. Let me switch my little gift goal. Thank you guys for knocking that out. It does help our algorithm and helps us get out on the For You page. And so thank you so much for that. Okay, so when we're looking at, when we redefine this idea of what true discipline is, we look at it from a holistic perspective. So how does that begin? That begins with self-awareness. We need to know our triggers and know our cycles. And so that can take a little bit of time for us to actually learn our own triggers. How do we know it's a trigger? Through our emotions. And so that means we actually have to feel our emotions. And sometimes that can be really challenging for people because they don't want to feel their emotions. So we have to process, not suppress our emotional state. Thank you guys so much. And as we are processing our emotions, we have to have, and have to is a strong word, I know, but we're optimizing to self-compassion. So as we begin to make an effort, and we're aware of our effort, and we have an emotional response around our effort, right? Because again, we're conditioned to a certain thing. So we may be conditioned externally for approval, or acceptance or validation, right? Or we can just be absolutely exhausted with the sheer thought, because by the time we get to this point, we have broken all the rules to ourselves. We have no boundaries left. And so we have to reset our boundaries. We've just given and given and given. And so as we're resetting our boundaries and recalibrating our boundaries, hey, ATL, that can be, hey, Mad King, that can be a challenge. But we first start with our boundaries with ourselves, what we will and will not accept for ourselves. And then we look at our external, and what's our external, the boundaries that we set with other people, because people will come and want, right, us to do things for them at the time frame that they want us to do them. And so we have to have some sort of agreement or arrangement to work together as a team. And so as we're living in more of a vision-based living, and so this comes back to, again, your core values. So if you have a core value of being relaxed, or being kind, or being still, or being thoughtful, or any of those things, then what it tends to happen is that your actions are going to fall into alignment with that. Thank you so much for the follow. And when you have that self-compassion and your grace without guilt, you begin to really hone in on what really matters to you. Again, that does not necessarily mean that people outside of self will get that philosophy. And so we have to continue to reaffirm this. And that's why we call it a discipline. So it's actually a discipline to self. It's not necessarily a discipline to others. So when we look at motivation versus discipline, because some people will try to use motivation instead of actually being more disciplined, motivation is that temporary feeling. It's based off of reactivity. So what happens is that, hey, half-eaten apples, what happens is we have usually a fear response. And so based off of that fear response, we're going to react. And as we react, it's going to the epinephrine, norepinephrine, and hey, Daphne, and all of the cortisol is going to help us kind of propel us forward. This is just kind of an impromptu thing. I'm teaching on discipline today. So I just kind of created it and thought it was, when I connected in, I said, I think discipline would be good. So I've already posted. If you're in Intro to Holistic Medicine, I've already posted all of week 12 in the course shell. So it's all in there. And what I will be doing is cleaning up the weeks, and, making sure that it's really clear for you. And so I thought, it'd be kind of fun to do a class on discipline, especially. And so I'm finally back in St. Lucia. I was inspired to go live a couple times, but my bandwidth wasn't quite where it needed to be, meaning my energetic bandwidth. And so it was interesting because I had some really cool backgrounds and things like that for it, because I was in New York and I was in Virginia and that sort of thing. But I really was very respectful of how my energy levels were and how they felt and that kind of thing. And so I decided, I got back last night and I got some really good rest. And so I decided to schedule this today to talk about discipline and redefine discipline, especially as everybody is moving into, their courses. And so, motivation again comes from that reactivity. Thank you for the heart, me, and the follow. That reactivity, and that reactivity really is more short term, because you're using force over power. You're not actually having this self-love and this compassion of self. So if I would have gone live, I would have been using my motivation, right? I wouldn't be using my discipline because it felt forced, right? Not that I couldn't come in and perform, and I've done it a billion times, but my energy levels weren't to the place where I was, really present. And there was a lot going on, obviously, coming from St. Lucia to New York to Virginia, travel is a lot. And so I reflected on and kind of unpacked this idea of discipline being very different from motivation. And so discipline is more of the sustained practice where you are more self-aware, right? So I'm self-aware to the fact of, okay, my priorities are my patients and making sure that they're cared for while I'm traveling. But then also too, I've got my students as well and wanting to care for them. However, the old consciousness would have been, oh, I'm going to click on my motivation and I'm going to power through. But instead I said, I'm going to really sit with myself, be with myself. Thank you for the roses. And I'm going to really connect back to my energy, and I'm not going to overextend. And even though I have a commitment, right, I try to maintain consistency. Now, does that mean that I'm going to show up in this perfect way? Absolutely not. In fact, perfectionism is not discipline. It's more of that punishment perspective. And so we want to have this bridge between our intention and transformation, and it comes after a decision. Now, again, I know I'm conscious of the fact that there was definitely something rattling around in my brain, which was triggering an emotional response, which was creating inaction. I was very aware of my inaction. But instead of judging myself, shaming myself, or forcing myself, I was allowing myself to be with that inaction. Thank you for the roses and the joining, Evolving Seeds. Good to see you. So instead of that, I really, wanted to integrate and unpack this concept of discipline, because so many of us, blame and shame ourselves. So yesterday, as I got back on my drive, once you get to the airport, it's like an hour drive from the airport back to my house. And so I took a couple like discovery calls. So I do like 15-minute complimentary discovery calls. And the discovery calls purpose is to introduce you to kind of my style of practice. And so I was speaking to a gal and, having this conversation. Now, mind you, I had been traveling. Like, it's a big day of travel. I treated like 12 hours of patients yesterday and then woke up, had to wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and get on the plane, and then, flying from New York to St. Lucia and then having to drive an hour. It's a lot, and you have to go through customs, and there's all kinds of different, moments and stuff. Even though it's a straight flight, it takes a lot of bandwidth out of you, and I wasn't, feeling 100% physically as well. So I was kind of managing that, and then just kind of trying to really, honor, my energy and be more in my emotionally intelligent state. So as I'm driving, I'm like, oh, I'll take a couple calls because they build up. So I want to be mindful of them. So I called, and so, what's interesting is that I get to choose my own bandwidth. I get to choose, how I work. And so, I'm very data driven and very accountable in my practice. So it's important for people to understand, it's not just about, trauma dumping, your whole story, because I've heard a lot of stories, and especially in a discovery call, the intention behind the discovery call was really to discover if this is a good fit in relationship, right? So this particular individual, they had said that they had been tracking, and they were having challenges with their hormones and their neurotransmitters, and I brought it back to metabolic because that's really where most diseases begin and end, is metabolic conditions. And so this person kind of already had a bias in their mind of what they thought what it was and what it was supposed to be. And so when I didn't meet that, right, there was a reaction. And so it got me thinking about, like, well, when I was tracking this, I was obsessive with it, and I was this with it, and I was that with it, and all these things. And so it got me really thinking about discipline and how we look at discipline. And discipline, again, is very different from motivation, very, very different. And a lot of times we have a trauma response when it comes to our discipline. And so the trauma being a fight, flight, freeze, or even a fawn response. And so when we're in a fight response, we get aggressive. And so this particular individual, when I communicated this and held them accountable, they said, oh, well, you're being rude or disrespectful, right? And that's a common kind of a projection or initial response because, right, we don't want to see what we don't see. And so the ego will click on, right? And so then naturally there's a flight response, a procrastination. And so the procrastination being, they hung up the phone on me, right? They didn't want to see it. They didn't want to look at it. It wasn't something that they could see was possible for themselves, right? And so as a response to that, there's an inability or a freeze to take action. And so what does that mean? Meaning that now they are frozen in, their emotional response. Now they may have gone to the next, caller or the next, provider that they thought could help, but really they're looking for that external validation. They're looking for someone to confirm what they already know to be true. They're not aware of any new awarenesses. And how do we tag this to discipline? Because the ask was about tracking, right? And so we have to track our data. Otherwise, it's just a hypothesis, right? It's just a guess. We don't know. It may seem arduous to have to track our food, but we assess our food from our macronutrients, our proteins, our fats, and our carbs. And so why do we do that? Because if your body is not well, we've got to make sure that we're tracking our protein. Why? Because protein helps us to repair and heal our bodies. And so even though we have all kinds of thought processes and emotional responses attached to these things, if our body is not well, there is a little bit of a order of operations, or like we have talked about, therapeutic order that we have to follow. And so sometimes this is where people really become very stuck in their a dis-ease, we'll call it, right? So remember, a disease or a condition doesn't just poof developed, right? Yes, it will be totally posted. It's gonna stream and stuff like that, and then I'll need to break it down and all the various things, right? So I'm trying to get things, this is why I'm looking at discipline, right? I'm looking at this along with, because I had intentions, right? I had intentions of going live every day, especially this week, starting on Monday. But I had to honor my emotional reactions. I had to honor what I was feeling within myself. I had to honor the fact that I had really good energy for my patients and I sustained and all of that, but I didn't necessarily, and I thought about it. I said, oh, I could go live. I could go live here. I could go live there or go live there. But then I said, but would that be putting too much stress and burden, right? So I start to get into a story, right, about all the things. And then, of course, that's going to trigger an emotional response. But for me, especially, I have struggled with, this fawning response, making sure that, oh, I want to make sure everyone's taken care of. And if you are a Black woman like I am, this is something that we most certainly struggle with all the time. And this is part of that mammy consciousness. We are, in fact, when I was in New York, thank you for the follow, I was sitting at the bar and there was this dynamic, a great place, like it was amazing place and amazing people. And I was there, and there was a lady sitting, and she was talking about how she was constantly giving and giving and giving to her work. Hey, touted kisses, and they weren't, and she termed it as Black girl magic. That she's doing all these things and making all these things work, and them expecting her to do that, but not necessarily seeing her or hearing her. And even the dynamic, even with her mother, which was pretty, very similar to mine, which is this, inherent jealousy and control and subjugation. And as long as you're only so big, then it's okay because it's this extension of me. And so again, as I'm kind of processing and taking in all of this information, I'm also, thank you for the heart me, I'm also seeing how this has impacted my discipline and how this has impacted me showing up, not just for myself, but for other people, because I want to show up authentically for myself, right? And then naturally, secondary to that, show up for other people. And so how do we have this balance where we know that we're going to disappoint other people? We know that we're going to, in some respect, let some people down, right? And how do we process that in the scope and the structure of discipline? So for me, it's been about awareness, right? It's been about me really breathing into myself. It's also about me paying attention to my nervous system and how my nervous system feels. And so I also spoke with another gentleman too, who was not feeling well. And he was talking about, like, he's dating all these women, he's passing through whatever, and he's dating all these women and all these different things happening. And he was saying that when he was around women that he didn't feel compatible with or healthy with, or really didn't want to settle down with, he would get a real fear response. And I explained that that's his nervous system, right? That's your nervous system. And we don't often trust our nervous system. Thank you for the shares, because we're constantly assessing ourselves for safety. And so when our nervous system kind of dysregulates, or it goes, oh my gosh, there's a fear response, we often then go into our minds and justify and rationalize and all of those things. So again, being more in alignment looks like these daily practices. What are those? When we do our morning flows. And so I woke up at 4 a.m., bright and early. I then went back to sleep, unfortunately, but it got me back into that. Okay, I get up, I meditate, I create intentions for my day. And then I structure my day to be able to affirm, right? And to be able to let myself know that I'm safe and that I get to choose how my day goes. And so we can use lots of visual anchors, like our vision boards or our reminders. And so using some sort of biofeedback tool. You can even use your heart rate. You can use, any kind of external tool, visual. I'm a very visual person, so I'll put reminders up, or I'll look at my vision board or whatever, right? And then there's also community. So we're building a community slowly, and as we build our community, we're assessing each other and really looking at, okay, who's here to support and who's here not to support. And so we want to look at where these challenges occur within our own self, right? Where we find ourselves in that fight or flight or freeze mode, and where we find ourselves, over giving, or we find ourselves really in this state where we are not being true to ourselves, and we can feel it. And so we, again, will try to push it down, try to suppress it, try to avoid it, try to deny it, try to gaslight ourselves. But what we want to do is we want to keep going, right? So instead of hey Candace, instead of gaslighting ourselves, we want to acknowledge, right? Okay, my nervous system is feeling like this, right? So another situation that was pretty profound is, I my husband and I, he picked me up from the airport. There's all these things, and I was really just in a very challenging space emotionally and mentally. And so I just wanted to be not around so many people, because I'd been around so many people, for a lot. And so normally I would internalize, right, emotions of people around me, right? And he had his emotions and I had my emotions. And normally I would internalize that. But instead, I went into myself and really connected with this shame, because again, I've been trained and conditioned to shrink my emotional state, be ashamed of how I feel emotionally, to allow other people to have their emotions much bigger than mine. And so this realization was really about me taking back my own emotional state and allowing my emotional state. And it's kind of interesting, because as I was doing this processing work, as we were driving back, because I remember I told you from the airport to my house is an hour one way. And so as I realized that, my husband goes, I feel really sad all of a sudden, right? Because again, we've been so conditioned to take on, everyone else's mental and emotional state around us. And so as I decided to not live in shame, and instead of be with my emotion and almost give people back, and there was no one in specific that I was doing this with, which was the fascinating part. And so immediately as I do it, reverb, right? And so that's that transformation of, no, I get to own this. I get to own myself. I have a right to have my emotions, right? And I don't have to react to them, and I don't have to judge them, and I don't have to make up some story about them. I can just be with them, right? And it's okay. And they're independent of other people's. And so the result naturally is then he's like, I just want to touch you, and I just want to love you, and I just want to, all of these very loving things that I would have preferred over what he chose to do. So, but nonetheless, right, I saw an immediate response. And again, brings myself back to this kind of idea of how we are conditioned culturally, familiarly, and societally to really keep things going for ourselves that are healthy, things that really work for ourselves. All right, so let's look at the framework here. So hopefully you can see that. Okay, great. So there's a practical framework to this. So where are we now, right? So where am I in the process? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I mad? Am I glad? Where am I at? And wherever I'm at, I'm going to honor that. Okay. So as I'm going through the airport, I'm not feeling the greatest, right? I'm feeling all of these different feelings, because it has been just such an incredible, journey and time, and lots of interactions, and lots of emotions, and lots of thoughts and feelings. And so I have to recommit myself back to myself. What am I trying to build? What am I trying to create? Because I've been out of it for a while. And so needing to look at it from different perspectives and different angles. And again, I'm doing this more internally than externally. We again have been conditioned to not trust ourselves, not listen to ourselves, not honor our truth, but immediately go to the next person. So even if our actions, are happening, our actions may not be in alignment with us. And what do I mean by that? If I have a thought process that I don't trust myself, and I don't trust what I feel, hey, little sassy, and I'm not having an easy time with how I feel, and then I'm generating all of these emotions, and instead of me sitting with them and being with them and learning them and honoring them and accepting them, I'm now going to someone someone else to try to soothe them or pacify them. And so I have to come back and recalibrate to myself and stay with myself. And so again, if we're chronically going outside of ourselves, that is a sign that we're not trusting ourselves. And so we want to recalibrate back into what really matters for me. And then we stay consistent with that. So what mattered to me was that I wasn't around other people. I needed no stimulus. And my husband was very gracious in allowing that. Obviously not initially. He was gonna but let's do this and let's do and I'm like, no, this is what I need to recalibrate. And then I'm going to stay consistent with myself on this. I'm not going to deviate for this. And so I'm going to instead stay devoted to myself and reflect on how I'm feeling, right? And how I need to hold on to this discipline that I'm generating within myself. And remember, our discipline is a devotion to something. So for me, my devotion and my love was really being to myself, for myself, by myself, with myself. And so that's where we want to get it to, where we're not constantly, when I focus on myself, even in relationship, that's where I'm honored and protected and supported in all the things. When I abandon myself and I go out to other people and make sure that this person's cared for and that person's cared for and this person's cared for, that looks like something different. That's an unhealthy relationship with discipline. Meaning if I'm tracking to make someone happy, or I'm tracking to get a gold star, or I'm tracking, and when I say tracking, I'm talking about our food, right? And just kind of giving it to you in a practical sense, right? Discipline can be seen in many different components. So physically, right, when we're looking at discipline, a lot of times we're holding ourselves accountable. How do we hold ourselves accountable? Through health data. Otherwise, it's just a hypothesis. It's just a guess. We're not actually verifying and validating our guess. And so a lot of people will, randomly do things. And again, that's not in alignment when we're reactive. When we're coming from this intention of holistic healing, we're looking at all aspects of ourself. We're looking at the physical aspects of ourself. We're looking at the environment aspects of ourself. We're looking at the mental aspects of ourself. We're looking at the emotional aspects of ourselves. We're looking at the psychosocial, spiritual aspects of ourselves. And ultimately, we're looking at the, ancestral component of ourselves. And so as we're looking at all of these parts of self, patterns begin to emerge with our relationship, especially when it comes to our behaviors of discipline and our approach to discipline. And so many of us have an unhealthy relationship with that. How do we know if we have an unhealthy relationship with discipline? You have an all or none thinking. If I'm not doing this perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. So you have rigidity that's fueled with guilt and shame. And so again, I have to be perfect. I have to make sure that this is done to some sort of, mythical, magical standard. And as I'm trying to continue to force my way into this and effort my way into this, I'm going to go into chronic burnout because I'm going to overcommit myself, because my productivity is going to be measuring my worthiness. So as long as I'm responding to you quickly, or I'm, attending to your every need, then that means that I'm worthy. But if I need to take a step back and I need to, allow myself to process or allow myself to be human for a minute, now all of a sudden I'm not worthy because I'm not always on the move, or I'm not productive. And so that goes back into self-punishment disguised as accountability. So now I'm going to just push through it. I'm going to not be present to how I feel or what I'm thinking. I'm going to push through all of that. I'm going to use power instead of force, and so I'm going to beat myself up. And so some people have this communication of I'm lazy, or I'm a failure, or I'm not good enough, or I'm too soft, or whatever, that continues to be pervasive. And so what that's going to do is create avoidance and procrastination. So we're going to be freezing, we're going to be running. So they're going to go from this fight, flight, freeze, fawn response where, you're fighting, you're, trying to struggle through it, that hustle culture or hustle healing, as we talk about, or you're going to be totally burnt out and doing nothing. And then you're going to beat yourself up. So it's that crash and burn cycle that a person's in. So they're either going on 100 or they're going none. And then as they are going these leaps and bounds of 100, right, they burn out and there's no rest or recovery. And so then they get to pretty much beat themselves up and say that they're wrong, they're bad, they need to be punished. And so what they do is they avoid things when really they need to speak their truth even into themselves. So where did we learn these again? Okay, well, I see that some of my behaviors are involved in this. Again, we've been trained, we've been conditioned through family dynamics. We've been trained and conditioned culturally, societally, through our school systems as well, even religious conditioning. So when we're looking at family dynamics and you're assessing this for yourself, when you're looking at that, you're looking at how were the punishment and reward cycles? Exactly. How was it? Was it conditional love? If you behaved, so to speak, were you rewarded with love and affection? Or if you stepped outside of the box and said your need, were you punished with withdrawal of love and affection? Were people, giving you the support that you needed, or were they using conditional love as kind of a weapon, right? Because we have unconditional love where people show up for each other, and then we're rewarded. Typically we should be, back to the should, right? We should be rewarded for all things, whether we do good or bad. Now, we're not saying everybody deserves a trophy or a cookie. What I'm saying is that we're worthy because we are, and that conversation isn't really had. It's we're worthy if we get an A on the test. We're worthy if we, do everything as I want you to do it and make me feel comfortable, or we do it however you see me to do it. There's not this, combination of reward system or encouragement typically in these very rigid all or nothing family dynamics. And so we want in the school system, it's all about obedience. So if you, stay in line and you sit at the chair and you do the work and, exactly. Yeah. Withdrawal affection if you don't comply. So it's a control mechanism that people use. So if you don't comply with whomever external, their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas, their perceptions, they don't really have a desire to hear you or see you. They see you as like an extension of themselves. They'll withdraw affection as like a way of punishing. It's a strategy to control the other person. And it's in family dynamics specifically. It can be in relationship dynamics too. But normally it starts in the family dynamic. So kind of on the court, what this would look like is, let's say, you were supposed to get an A on the test. Billy was supposed to get an A on the test, and Billy didn't get, thank you for the share, and Billy didn't get an A on the test. And so now dad is not speaking to Billy. Thank you for the heart me, is not speaking to Billy. He's really mad. But so there's no like outward reaction, but there's a punishment in terms of a withdrawal of affection. So maybe normally when Billy gets home, dad greets him, says, hi, how are you doing? How are things are going on? But because Billy didn't perform the way he was supposed to, now dad is withdrawing their love. So it's conditional love. And we've been we've been trained in this dynamic. So what happens with Billy? Billy feels that withhold of love. So Billy's going to work harder because he wants to attain, his father's approval, right? But what if, father doesn't have a healthy self-worth or a healthy self-esteem, or is insecure within themselves, which clearly if you're going to withdraw from your parent, or your child, because they didn't perform well, in a situation, that again, that lacks, emotional awareness or emotional intelligence. Instead, you would speak to the child and go, oh, I see, you made an effort, right? So you worked on this, that that part was good. So you want to affirm. However, we've got some, work still to do in these particular areas. And so what are you going to be putting in place in these particular areas to improve? So you're not withdrawing yourself from the dynamic. You're not, just canceling it and you're banished, which is normally, what happens. Family systems have a really hard time with communication. There's a lack of emotional intelligence. So hopefully that makes sense and you flesh that out. In the school system, again, it's all about obedience and not necessarily about creativity. Thank you for the heart me. I remember back in school, there was still very much creativity, but with the advent of SOLs and standardized testing, it's all about, hey, biology. It's all about the school system and you being in this structure and you fitting into these boxes. So if you're not a good test taker, as a for instance, or if you're a little more fidgety in school, or if you're more, talkative, or any of those kinds of things that are signs of a creative mind, and you're not in these structures, right? Then what happens? Your relationship with discipline, right, is impacted, because now in the conversations in the school systems are, oh, have you had this child tested for ADD, ADHD, blah, 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 blah. This child can't sit still, which, sitting still behind a desk with no creativity, with no movement, with no action, hello, that's not going to be easy. But then culturally, right, what do we have? What do we know? We know all about hustle culture, and you got to grind, rise and grind. That's big in the business world. We've got to put our head down, keep going, whether you're tired, you're not tired, you're this, you're that. You got to keep hustling, you got to keep growing. And then we put more of, societal aspects on us. We look more, psychosocial aspects of it. We also look at systemic aspects of it. Thank you for the roses. Right? This is the system, right? Definitely puts us in this hustle culture response, because we're not allowed to rest. What if we woke up today and we said, you know what? I can't go live today because, my bandwidth, I'm focused on this and I'm focused on that and I just don't have it, right? But hustle culture says self-abandon your own needs. Don't do that, because you need to get another dollar, you need to get another quarter, you need to get another nickel, and capitalism fuels this, right? Instead of being in alignment and showing up when you're 100%. There's not a show up when you're at 100% mentality. No, there's a rise and grind and get it done and, kill yourself or unalive yourself in the process. And then the last kind of cultural structure around discipline that we're taught is around religious conditioning. So discipline is seen as morality or sacrifice. So when we're looking at religion, because of original sin, it was wild treating patients in the South, because I learned a lot about Christianity and various different religions, not just Christianity, but there's a deep sense of morality. If I do this, I'm a good person. If I do that, I'm not a good person. And so I'm going to sacrifice myself because I'm this inherently shameful person. I'm this inherently bad person. And so because I'm this inherently bad and shameful person, I have to get into these dynamics of self-sacrifice, right? So I saw this a lot in some of the yogic practices, where there would be this very self-serving, self-sacrificial dedication and devotion to the ashram, where you would join an ashram and you would be in this ashram and you wouldn't get paid to being in this ashram, right? You wouldn't, think about like the monks, or think about like nuns and people like that, who dedicate their lives, they sacrifice their lives to the cause of whatever religious institution. And so that discipline is rooted in self-sacrifice. I'm going to give up my life. I'm going to give up my, material worldly things to be able to, participate and be a part of, this larger cosm. And so again, these are all different systems. There's no right or wrong or good or bad, but there's an awareness to how we have been indoctrinated into discipline. We've been indoctrinated based off of our religious dynamics, based off of the school system, based off of cultural conditioning and religious conditioning. So these are actual broken signs of discipline, but we want to always ask ourselves, who is that little voice voice in the head that's driving discipline. Because if it's our family dynamic, right, sometimes many of us were brought down instead of brought up, meaning we weren't encouraged, supported. We were the encouragement and the support, and everyone came to us and dumped on us. If it was, let's say, the school system, right, sometimes that's practical, sometimes that's not, but staying rigid, to the system or to your boss or to your family system, that again, you can start to quelch your own creativity and your own freedom of expression. And then if you buy too much into the cultural aspects of it, now you're really self-abandoning because you have to keep up with this much bigger microcosm. In a lot of ways, you think it's bigger than yourself. And then, if you're not really confused by all of that, then we just sprinkle in some religious conditioning where you either have to base it off of your morality, or if you're that sacrificial lamb. So you're getting these from all the voices from the past, from your family, from the school system, from your cultural conditioning. And if you have had any sort of touch with religion, and that doesn't necessarily mean you are a religious person now, but again, that indoctrination happens between 0 and 8 years old. So here's a way physically to begin to determine if you've been impacted by some of these misaligned methods of discipline. Remember, discipline does affect your nervous system. So we go into that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So you would be anxious, racing thoughts. You would oscillate between that and shutdown mode. Your muscles are going to be more tense. Maybe you have aching pains, bracing, shoulder pain, jaw clenching. Respiration, meaning your breathing is going to be inhibited. Shallow breathing, chest breathing, kind of thing, more driving that anxious response. Your digestive system, you may have appetite fluctuations going from wanting to eat everything that's not nailed down to more of a dopamine catabolism, to maybe serotonin crash outs where you don't want to be bothered, you don't want to talk to people. That can affect your stomach. Also, too, if you're eating things that are not necessarily going to be supportive, you're going to go maybe towards your high fat, your high sugar, your high sodium foods, which again is not going to help you and going to make you physically not feel well. And then your sleep cycles, you go into hypervigilant state, insomnia, disrupted sleep, you're able to sleep, you're not able to sleep, etc. And so this is when your discipline is not in alignment. Thank you for the share. And so it's a way for you to assess it in your body, whether you have a misalignment or misrelationship with this concept of discipline. And so if that's the case, we have to reparent ourselves from discipline. That means that we have to go in and kind of speak to our inner child, because our inner child wasn't given, what it needs. And our inner child, again, is our subconscious 0 to 8 years old. And it's telling our conscious mind 9 to 12 how to act and be in the moment for our behavior. And so here's the thing, we have to recognize what that child's needs were. So we have to go in and meditate, and we have to greet our inner child. How do we do that? We have to feel like we're in a safe space, and then we assess if our if we feel safe, or we feel as though that little child can come to us. Sometimes when we first connect with our inner child does not feel safe, and so we don't want to force our inner child to have this discussion with us. We want to greet them wherever they are, and then we want to stay safe with consistency. So consistently speaking to your inner child through visualization and talking to them about discipline and what discipline was for them. That's the first step. You have to acknowledge and validate what your inner child's relationship with discipline was. Was it a smack on the head? Was it a you're doing wrong? Was it you're doing bad? Was it, you're going to go to hell? Was it, what was your conditioning? Oh, if you're a good girl and you get an A, this will happen. Here's a treat. What was your relationship with discipline as a child? We talk about the structures. We talk about, how your emotional state, your body, your physical body is. And so now we have to kind of think about this compassionate structure versus forcing ourselves to do anything. So if you were creating this loving routine for your 8-year-old, what would that look like? You may have to write that down. You may have to read some books. You may have to talk to some people. You may have to watch some YouTube videos, because if you were raised by wolves, who had no level of gentleness or lovingness or anything, but instead, wasn't encouraging or safe and supportive, but was more judgmental or more admonishing or shaming or those things, your relationship with discipline is non-existent. And so you're not going to want to create off of that. You're not going to want to tell your child they're bad and they're horrible and they need to be punished. Thank you for the follow. Instead, you're going to want to learn, oh, what does it mean to be safe and support? What does it mean if I fail at something? What happens? What do I do with that child? What do I tell that child if they don't do well? If they're not, if they're blessed high rising on the afternoon, how do I model this healthy behavior? It's going really well. Thank you for asking. How do I acknowledge myself in the moment compassionately and not use force? And not use, all the control and the manipulation and the you're bad and you're wrong and you're this and you're that. How can I create space, for this child? And so we'll work on a little bit of the how. Thank you for the heart me. So a little bit of the how, right? I try not to do too much of the how, because the how is going to be based off of you. But some of your limiting beliefs are, I'm just not a disciplined person, right? So you may tell yourself, I'm just not into discipline. I'm not good at it. I don't like it. Well, guess what? If that's your story, that's going to stay your story, and you're never going to actually break out of that story. If you are in this story of, I always quit eventually, thank you for my gift goal for the roses. Appreciate you. I always quit eventually. Guess what? Your wish is my command. You're going to quit, or I'm too creative for this. This isn't going to work for me. If you're more of that diva kind of personality. And so it's okay to be creative, but there's a balance between creativity and structure. You have to be consistent. Even Picasso, right? Not that that's the best example, but Picasso had a structure and a discipline of waking up every morning and painting. Like every day, he was fueled by passion of painting and bringing his vision out into the world. Now, did the world understand his vision? Absolutely not. He didn't make a dime off of his work. Very sad story, actually. But that didn't stop him from showing up creatively and showing up passionately. And so it doesn't mean that I doubt he was bored. I think he probably enjoyed what he was doing. Now, again, whether he generated revenue off of that, that's a whole nother thing. But we want to assess these identities and these limiting beliefs, because again, we're all on some level slaves to capitalism, on some place. And so, however, we have to, right? We don't have to do anything, but if we choose to, we can go from this chaotic feeling, thought, idea, and perception of I've got to hustle and make it happen, to, okay, I'm going to be grounded and I'm going to be peaceful in these choices. I'm also going to maybe move from being unreliable to maybe being consistent. Maybe I'm going to shift from being resistant to being receptive and open. I may shift from being fearful to be empowered. So this is where we're looking at our self-concept. Remember, as we talked about self-concept is all about who you see yourself as in the world. It's a combination of your self-identity, your self-worth, and your self-love and your self-esteem. And so it's who you choose to be. In any given moment, you're choosing to be a human being, right? And so are you going to choose to be chaotic or grounded? Are you going to choose to be reliable or consistent? Are you going to choose to be resistant or receptive? Are you going to choose to be fearful or empowered? These are conscious shifts that you can make every single day. And how we affirm this is, I'm someone who honors my commitments, right? Even if you're somebody who's chronically late, you're telling yourself, I am someone who now honors my commitments. Even though in the past, I have been somebody that is not disciplined, I am going to now show up as someone who honors my commitments. I'm choosing this. I'm sifting and sorting out these limiting beliefs, and I'm choosing a different story or a different self-concept for myself. I always quit eventually. To I show up for myself with love, right? So I'm choosing to be reliable. So I'm choosing to be consistent instead of unreliable. And so because I'm choosing to be consistent, I'm choosing to show up for myself with love. Instead of I'm too creative for this structure, or I don't like to have to do a structure, I'm going to go from my resistance. I'm no longer going to be resistant. I'm going to be receptive. And if I'm receptive, I'm going to tell myself my consistency actually creates my freedom, because now that I have more consistency, I actually ironically have more freedom in my life. That's what a structure provides you, is actually more freedom to execute whatever it is you're trying to execute. So if you have a limiting belief of I'm being disciplined means being boring, I'm going to shift from this fearful state of I'm afraid to be boring to more empowered of, number one, I don't care about being boring, but I really am more empowered to fulfill on all of the things, because I'm building trust with myself daily. So I trust myself to show up for myself every single day. And so I get to decide how I show up. And who says me showing up has to be fearful? In fact, me showing up can be very exciting, very enthusiastic, very relaxed. It just depends on what I choose myself and what I choose to tell myself. So when we're in aligned discipline, we're in a daily devotion to ourselves. We're loving ourselves. We're honoring ourselves without expectation of being anything for anyone. So we're remembering what we really need. And we're practicing this as a spiritual practice. Discipline is actually a love of action, right? Discipline is a love of affirming to yourself about yourself to yourself. So if I love myself, right, I'm going to pack some fruits and some vegetables and some foods that I can take with me, right, on the plane. So I'm not having to eat a snack box or risk if they don't have a kale and quinoa salad, right? I'm going to bring these things with me because I'm going to be consistent with loving myself, with honoring myself. So now this is a devotion to myself. Thank you for the donuts. This is a consistent practice of loving myself, of connecting with myself, of honoring myself consistently. Oh, thank you for the hey partner. Cool. All right. And so when we track, we're going to do that with compassion. So again, we don't have to make up a story about our tracking, right? So we don't have to now shame ourselves and blame ourselves. And let's say if I want to go, okay, I'm going to track my water, or I'm going to track my food, or I'm going to track my sleep, or I'm going to track something that I want to improve with my health. I'm not now going to do this in a fearful way. I'm going to do this in a more mindful way. So I'm going to be curious as to what all the things are, right, that are out of alignment. I'm going to greet this with curiosity. That's how I'm going to see it. I'm not going to see this as a part of an extension of shame, or judge myself, or put myself down, or do any of those additional practices. And if those limiting beliefs come up, I'm going to reframe them. I'm going to acknowledge them and validate them. I'm going to maybe check who's talking to my little child like that. And instead, I'm going to now speak to myself and speak to my child with love. So it's more of I'm going to observe myself in these actions. And I'm going to monitor. I'm going to also be realistic. Maybe if I'm new to tracking, I need to just write it down, not put it in the app. Maybe I need to only track one thing for once. Maybe I need to just track two things. What's my bandwidth? And I get to choose what my bandwidth is. I don't have to decide, to go, again, I'm getting out of this rigidity, this all or nothing, this shame-based avoidance, procrastination, accountability. I'm going to do it with grace. Okay, so if we want to practice this, I'm going to give you a challenge. Let's see. Here's your challenge. Just to check to see how you're doing. It's just for 3 days. You're going to choose one aligned habit, whether that's meditation, whether that's water, whether that's tracking your protein, your heart rate, whatever that may be. And you're going to track it if it feels in alignment. What do I mean if it feels in alignment? If it doesn't feel in alignment, if it feels forced, you have to honor that within yourself. It's not powering through it. But you're going to choose that, and you're going to track your experience with it without judgment. And you're going to reflect daily on how it feels in your body and in your spirit and in your mind. How is this practice making me feel? Tracking my water, how does it make me feel? It makes me feel accomplished when I track my water. What made it easier or harder to show up? When I track my water, if I have a 32-ounce container, it's so much easier because I know I just have to drink 2.5 of those a day. Right? If I don't have my container, it's going to be really challenging. And so what would make this more aligned tomorrow? So when I didn't have my water container and I'm getting up multiple times, I noticed if I'm getting up too many times, I'm not going to get up. I'm just going to be, dare I say lazy. That's a limiting belief, but I'm not going to be motivated to get up and walk over. So I learned, right? I need to have those 232-ounce or 132-ounce container because I'll get up and fill it. And then I can celebrate, right? When I drink enough water, I love my skin just feeling so supple and relaxed. So that's my internal motivation, is to keep my skin nice and hydrated. I know that if I don't drink enough water, I'm not going to be hydrated. My bowels are going to slow down. My skin is not going to, feel very healthy. I'm not going to be detoxifying my body. There's a lot of different challenges that show up. So I want to really honor myself in my practice to myself. And so that's where we look at accountability. So let's, for this next section, and then we'll finish out our class, we're going to talk about how accountability plays into this. So accountability is going to keep you connected to the intention. Without accountability, it's so easy to go into those old habits because the accountability keeps you structured. It reminds you why you even did this to begin with. Accountability doesn't mean external accountability. We want to actually build internal accountability, but some people will require external accountability in the beginning until they have that internal accountability. And that external accountability becomes you're so welcome, becomes a mirror. Because if you're not able to see and you're not able to be aware and you're not able to shift, then you need a mirror to show you what your intentions are. So discipline without intention becomes control, and accountability brings purpose back into the process. So we've got some people that perhaps have disconnections with accountability. Again, if you're looking at society, what society determines as accountability, or what family decides as accountability, or what school system defines as accountability, or what religion defines as accountability, you may have not sifted and sorted through all of these examples of accountability. And so remember, your accountability keeps you connected to your intention while you're disciplining, while you're being present to how you're feeling. And it keeps you into the why. It keeps you focused on it, right? So here's some of the challenges that arises with accountability, right? There's danger in isolation. So trying to change in isolation increase your risk of shame and self-sabotage. So when you're hiding, you're not being present, you're not speaking about your struggles, you're not speaking about your self-talk, it reinforces your same beliefs. You're pretty much just regurgitating on your own thought process. That way, in this class, we've set up your discussion boards to be able to discuss and get it out. So awesome, touted kisses. Thank you for sharing. When you are sharing, right, you are giving it life, right? When we have to, when we want to transform it, we have to speak it out. We have to acknowledge it. If we don't acknowledge that its existence, we're giving it power in the dark. So we want to get it out into the light so it doesn't have air to breathe. Because now there's safety with accountability partners. There's reflection. Even if you're not necessarily having someone hold your hand through it, just speaking it out, now you're releasing it. Now you're letting it go. And these shared journeys, right, now normalizes the challenges. I could not speak intimately about these things unless I've experienced them, right? If I wasn't constantly looking and deconstructing, I wouldn't be able to share what I've learned. And again, observing, oh, I set an intention to go live every day, but my bandwidth could not seem to what was going on mentally, thought process, emotionally, spiritually, in my actions, in the environment. And I'm still unpacking all of that. I'm still looking at it. And that's why I wanted to come on and talk about it, because if it's coming up for me, it's coming up for a lot of people. And so how do I create self-accountability? I ask what happened. I have to, I go, geez, I said I was going to go live. What happened? What did I discover? So one of the things I discovered was I was overwhelmed by all the peopling. It was a lot of peopling. And I had to be very hyper vigilant, because I'm shifting from one place to one place. And my inner child loves to feel safe. I've trained my inner child to learn how to feel safe. And boy, she loves her safety. And so anytime she's shifting from one place to another, she's like, wait, what's happening? Where are we going? And so even though I have to affirm and I have to, really talk until I feel this greater sense of stability, I really can't move to the next. So I made sure in my mind, I go, okay, yesterday is a travel day. I'm going to get myself clicked in. I'm going to get some rest. Finally, I'm home. Finally, I'm back to where my sense of safety is, because I'm not here, there, everywhere, right? Even though I was safe everywhere I went, there's that thought process of a lack of safety. So what can I try next in order to, make sure that I maintain this accountability? Oh, thank you for the heart, me, Dr. Michelle, right? I can maybe be a little bit more realistic with myself. Maybe I can, honor myself more. Maybe I can be more self-supportive. But also too, I'm like, okay, I'm going to recalibrate. We always want to recalibrate things. We want to reflect. We want to use our emotions as a tool for us to observe and build that self-awareness and build that internal explanation, right? Yay. My prosperity's alarms went off, right? So now I can choose, right? How I get to choose. All right, so next time I'll probably be more realistic with myself when it comes to travel, because traveling, I'd rather it be something where, thank you for the heart me, where people aren't necessarily depending on me to do it, but that honors that if I want to do it, it's available. So I can find this happy medium. And that is allowing me to grow. That doesn't mean that I need to now have external accountability or external validation, but let's talk about what that is, what that looks like. External validation versus internal validation. So internal accountability, right, or validation is, your journaling, your check-ins, your values. So in integrity, I wasn't even operating within my values. There was a conflict there. There was a resistance there. And then a lot of it had to do because my personal rituals weren't there. My daily practices weren't there. I stayed in different environments. I went to different places. I was around different people, right? So I was checking in with myself. Thank you for the roses, but not necessarily checking in with external. And so external accountability, those are your coaches, your therapists, your community, people that you've kind of put into alignment. These are people you have to feel safe with. Otherwise, it comes off, really judgmental. So we don't want to give accountability to people who have not asked for it, who don't want our external accountability, which can be difficult because we think we know better for everyone here on the planet. However, when we pull ourselves back, we learn that it's this internal accountability, not external accountability. It's about, us holding ourselves accountable, not looking for the world to hold us accountable. Because if we look for the world to hold us accountable, good God, people have different motives. This person has a motive, that person has a motive, this person has a motive, and their motives may not be in alignment with my intention. I have an intention and other people have motivations, right? I have motivations as well, but I'm shifting out of motivation into discipline, into personal accountability. So I'm not going to participate in that hustle culture or participate in where I ignore what I feel in the moment to power through, to fawn myself, to self-abandon my own needs, right? Or to withdraw. I'm not going to use all those defense mechanisms that have allowed me. And if I am exhibiting those defense mechanisms, I'm going to observe them. I'm going to journal them. I'm going to check in with myself. I'm going to reflect, is this in alignment with my integrity, my authenticity? Hey, Baba, my core values that I say to myself, which have been set up. And I think I've done a class on that before. Now, looking at toxic versus healthy accountability. So toxic accountability is rooted in shame. If I don't show up a certain way, I'm a bad person. If I don't show up a certain way, this bad thing is going to happen, right? Or I need to show up so I can get a gold star. People will think I'm a good person or whatnot, right? Or even I'm going to show up because if not, I'm not going to be perfect and I'm bad and I'm wrong and I need to be punished. Or I'm going to show up because if I don't, then I'm going to fail. And I don't want to fail because failure means that I'm this horrible, blah, blah, blah. Now this has something to do with my personal character, which truly it doesn't. Thank you for the share. Instead, healthy accountability is I am truly rooted in my self-love and my self-growth. So anything that shows up, I'm going to observe it. I'm not going to judge it, change it, fix it, make anything different. I'm going to acknowledge the progress. I'm going to acknowledge the focus. I'm going to reflect and I'm going to redirect and I'm going to find a new way. I'm going to look for which door is open. I'm going to pound on all these doors and one of these babies is going to open. And maybe that door is just sitting with myself. Maybe I don't need an action. Maybe I just need to sift and sort through my own thoughts and my own feelings first through journaling or reflection. Because if I'm holding that sacred mirror up to myself, I'm reflecting on who I'm choosing to be. Am I choosing to be resistant? Am I choosing to be avoidant? Am I choosing to be fearful? And I'm witnessing myself. I'm observing myself. And I'm looking, what's the difference between who I'm choosing to be in this moment and who I want to become in the next moment? Because if I'm shifting my identity from who I be right now to who I become, who do I choose to become? And what am I affirming to myself to override the programming? So we have software that's been installed, right? But we can uninstall it and reinstall a new program. And that's what our affirmations are, is installing new hardware, new software rather. So we can't really, the hardware, that's done more physically through like neurofeedback, biofeedback, because now you're shifting the neural pathways. Even Kundalini yoga and my morning flows, we're shifting the hardware with that. We're shifting those neural pathways. But our software, right, is our programming, right? Is how those apps are actually functioning on our phone. It's not the actual phone itself. That would be our brain. That would be how our brain is configured. That would be, are we able to get into executive functioning, or is our amygdala, right, which is our fight or flight, is that just firing, which then now our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning shut off, our vagal nerve is sending us into a fight or flight state. So you'll be able to determine that, right? If you learn to sit with yourself and anxiety comes up and fear comes up, and you can observe these two realities, because you don't just go from one self-identity to the next. You're observing yourself in that old identity and you're making different choices. You're a visionary, seeing your highest potential, stepping into your highest potential. You have to be able to change your mind and decide to move. So who do I trust in my world to hold me accountable? Number one, we want to trust ourselves first and foremost. If you don't trust yourself, don't trust anyone else. And trust is a big word. It's a big word and a big concept and a big deal. And so we may not have people in our lives right now that we can trust, quite frankly. And so trust is, I would take a bullet for this person. I would, I don't necessarily trust everything they do, but I trust them enough. And I trust what they say. But I'm going to be my own personal accountability without punishment. So I'm going to hear what they say after I've sat with myself, because I am my number one. So I'm going to sit with myself. I'm going to be with myself, because many of you are conditioned to self-abandon and go run to other people for approval. So you got to stop doing that, and you can stop it and sit with yourself first. Because here's what I do. So I will first sit with myself and be with myself, and then I will ask, who has a message for me? And I'll go through the people in my life, this person, that person, this person, that person. And wherever I get a ring, I get a hit, I get an intuitive nudge, I go, oh, that person, right? And sometimes that person will just come in. So, I was really working through a lot of stuff, and I don't even know who this person was. Apparently this was a patient that I've had the same telephone numbers forever. So I had a patient that just texted me some random thing, and they said, hey, I felt the need to text this to you. And you taught my daughter this years ago, and I never understood it then, but I get it now. And I just wanted to reiterate back to you this quote that you used to always say, that you taught us, that really has changed our lives. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Right? And immediately when I read that text, again, with a number I didn't even recognize, right? And again, I just texted back, thank you, because it came right on time. I trust myself, I trust the universe, and things show up. I don't have to go out and be in the hustle culture and figure it out and find it. I don't have to do all that. It came at the right time. It was like, yes, truly, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Because I was struggling with forgiveness. Literally a few hours before, I was like, this forgiveness thing is kicking my butt. Maybe I need to do a forgiveness practice. Maybe I need to do a Ho'oponopono. Maybe I need to do, the Brahmahara. Maybe I need to do a Kundalini on forgiveness, right? And all I needed was to hear that, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. And that immediately gave me emotion, shifted my perception, shifted my place, right? And so again, I didn't need to go outside of myself, but outside of myself brought that to me, right? And so again, we can be in this feminine energy, or we can be in a masculine energy. I prefer to be more in a feminine. Okay, so we want to create a structure, and you're going to keep hearing me talk about this damn structure. Structure, time blocking, structuring your time, structuring your environment, creating rituals for yourself, and resting to integrate all of it in. This is what change looks like. I'm going to structure my time. I'm going to block off my time for this task, for that task. I'm going to block off my time for teaching you guys. So I did. Right. And I'm going to make sure my environment, because even though I could have done it in New York, I could have done a thing, at the beach in VA, I could have done all over the place, but I didn't feel the vibe, right? I felt the vibe in the coffee shop. That was great. Right. But even in New York, there was so much going on. I just, right. And I was only there for like a day. So it was like passing through, right? I needed a physical space that I felt, and I felt great there. It was like a beautiful place, but I prioritized what I prioritized, which was just enjoying and being and being back in the city, and just going around and walking, and it was amazing, right? But then I was reflecting on, again, these rituals that I do and I practice. So I slept, and when I slept and I woke up here in my home in St. Lucia, right, I did a meditation. I woke up at 4 to do my meditations, heightened spiritual time of the day. And then I go back and I rest, and I allow my body, my mind, my spirit to take all of that in, right? Because we need to have various different places, strategies, all the things to help us in our healing process, in our healing practice. Let's see. Very good. I think we are done now. Yay. We got to the end of our slides. All right, perfect. Let me come out of our slide world. So this is what I've got for you when it comes to discipline today. It's all about really creating that discipline within yourself intrinsically, going to your thoughts. What are you thinking? What are you telling yourself? Are these limiting beliefs, right? And these limiting beliefs, where are they emotionally? Is this trapped emotion? Is this old? What is this? Right? What is going on here? Are you in a breakdown? Are you in a breakthrough? How do you feel? How present are you? And then as you're present with your emotional state, right? What limiting beliefs, what limiting thoughts come up? What do you need to change? What do you need to shift? Do you need to talk to your inner child? Do you need to let her know that she's safe? Do you need to create a new structure? Do you need to start a new ritual? Do you need to track something new? Do you need to just rest because you've been consuming so much? Right? There's no right or wrong answer. This is about going inward, not seeking outside. Right? I have this relationship with the inside and the outside. I trust the inside explicitly, and the inside is then going to generate the outside. The outside is going to mirror back to me what I need to see. And I trust myself to recognize it as it shows up, which is really fun. So when it shows up, I'm happy, I'm excited, right? And I act, but that wasn't always the case. Sometimes I would question it. It's not this, it's not that, it's not this, it's not that, right? Instead, I'm going to honor it and embody my thoughts and my feelings and my perceptions. I'm not going to gaslight myself. Instead, I'm going to really be with myself, and I'm going to journal. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to enjoy the experience of it. All right, everyone. Well, thank you guys so much for joining in on our class of Redefining Discipline. Remember, discipline is all about a devotion to yourself, which accountability is your connection back to your intention. Remember, we have our intentions up here that are floating. All of these unprocessed desires, we choose to bring whatever intention we have into our mind as a thought. There's millions of thoughts running through. And then that thought is going to generate an emotional response. That emotional response can either be from the past, it could be from the present, or it can be from the future. Remember, the past is already done, so that would be old processing. The present is really only what we have. If we're in the present, we're going to be calm, relaxed, more still. If we're in the future, we tend to be more anxious and fearful. So we're going to check where we're at and what we need to do. And as we're in the moment and we're in presence and we're in alignment, now our actions are going to take place. And our actions, we want to make sure that our actions are in alignment with our intentions. If there's resistance in that process, meaning that there's fear or there's lack or there's any sort of resistance to more of an inspired action and inspired flow, that we're doing it with ease and grace. So I'm tracking my food with ease and grace. I'm tracking my water with ease and grace. I'm tracking my, things with ease and grace, right? And as I'm tracking it, I'm showing up with total love and acceptance and honoring of self. I'm not coming at it from a place of punishment or judgment or hustle or figure it out or any of those things. I'm coming at it with this place of alignment and ease. Hey, Dontrell. Hey, Mad King. And as I'm doing that, as I'm coming from a space of ease, things show up. They show up easily. They show up effortlessly. They show up profoundly. Then messages are brought to me, right, as I need them along the way. And those messages are going to continue to reaffirm and hold me accountable to what it is that I've intended for myself. And then I'm going to do this thing day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. And even if I don't, right, I'm not going to judge myself. I'm not going to be frustrated with myself. I'm going to give myself grace. I'm going to give myself love. I'm going to give myself support. I'm going to give myself encouragement. I'm going to give myself strength. And how am I going to give this to myself? I'm going to do it with journaling, with breath, with movement, with sleep. So I had to reset myself. So I'm all reset now. back to the grind today, but not grinding in the cultural sense, grinding more so in living more in alignment with my intention, my thought, my action, clicking myself in so that I'm more sustained over time. So then what do? I go back to my structures. Okay, I'm going to schedule these things and I'm going to get these things done and I'm going to fulfill upon my core values of integrity and authenticity and all of the other compassion and the various things that I have determined are important to me with my values. So hopefully that helps. Again, I will also be live. I'm not going to be live tomorrow. I'm going to relax a bit and I've got some errands to do. But Saturday, I will be live in the morning, 11 a.m. Do look for the little ad like video that I'm going to be putting out probably later today, and share it, like it, comment, interact with it, please. It's the video promoting my Saturday's class. Again, it's extension on discipline and accountability. We'll kind of regroup and go deeper into this topic because I find it fascinating, human behavior, and it's going to help you in your public health journey. It's going to help you to reclaim your health and get back on track. And obviously, as you can see, it can be definitely applied to pretty much any area of your body. So any area of your life. So, all right, bye IG. See you guys later. Let's see. Bye Facebook.